Today we are here to discuss the role of media in disaster management. All of us know that disaster and media almost go hand in hand. After politics and crime, disaster makes the top stories everywhere, whether it is news channels or it is newspapers. But today, lots of people have begun to ask that why should only deaths and disaster make news? Why not efforts which help to prevent so much loss? Why not focus on stories of human courage, etc.? We are here to discuss this subject with you today, and we have with us Mr. Manu Gupta, who belongs to a young and energetic collective, a voluntary group, who is working with risk management in urban areas. And we have Mr. Gert, the regional delegate to South Asia from the International Red Cross. Mr. Gert, tell us more about the International Red Cross and your work in India.
Thank you, Sejo. Yes, I am indeed with the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. We maintain our regional office for South Asia here in Delhi. And our main aim is basically to work wherever we work in any part of the world with the respective national Red Cross or Red Crescent societies. So here in India, we are very closely linked with the Indian Red Cross and its work. We mainly focus on institutional and capacity building of the organization and the community, and as such we focus on disaster response, disaster preparedness, and how the local community at village level can be strengthened in their capacities.
Excellent. I'm sure we'll have a very fruitful talk. And Manu, why don't you tell us more about SEEDS?
Yeah, thank you, Shajal. I'm happy to be in the program. SEEDS is basically a group of development professionals. We started about 5 years ago, and we started working with the communities on environmental issues. Recently, about 3 years ago, my colleagues Anshu, Priya and I are now working with low-income vulnerable communities in Delhi and in other parts of India to work out various solutions on how they could cope up with disasters as and when they occur. So it's nice to be working with them and interacting with larger agencies, with governments, etc.
So I think we have the entire spectrum. I can represent the filmmakers and the media in general, and we have a seasoned Red Cross, and here we have a young group which is trying to build linkages. Why don't you start, Mr. Gert, with tell us, I'm sure the Red Cross have had several episodes of some nasty, some pleasant, of interacting with media. And with the satellite channels commanding, every hour of the day, I'm sure you must have had given a lot of thought to it.
Yes, absolutely. I think to explain that a little bit deeper, if you look back a couple of decades ago, you will find that the majority of media in those days was very slow-moving and was very much reporting disasters. In the former Soviet Union, it would have taken maybe several weeks until a disaster was known to the rest of the world. You are right to say that with increasing technology and satellite phone and all these kind of things, the world shrinks. So we hear very quickly about things that happen in any place of the world. Actually, we hear so quickly about it that we don't have time to react. Because something happens today, another thing happens tomorrow. This makes it much more important today to actually define the role of the media, who has moved away from the pure and mere reporting to almost a direction giving. Because in the international NGOs we realize today, if the initial report on a disaster is positive, basically we know we can work because funding will come forward. Whereas if the media reporting is in any way slanted towards the negative side, we find it very, very difficult to start any disaster response or any reconstruction program, because money will be much more difficult to get by.
What do you mean by positive? That's a very loaded word.
It is indeed very loaded, you are correct. Positive in the sense that the media highlights the realities and not the stereotypes we often like to hear. As our young colleague here from SEED was saying earlier on, it is very important to have a more professional outlook, to have actually the capacities of the people highlighted, rather than depicting them as helpless victims. When we hear today newscasts, media coverage, we very often are exposed to countless numbers of reports, how many people have died, have passed away in the disaster. Yet very rarely do we hear about the survivors, how they are coping with the disasters. If you compare, for instance, recent disasters in Central America, in Northern Africa, it is in almost all cases the local people, the local community, the neighbors who rescue their fellow victims long before international aid agencies even can think about helping. So therefore we must focus much more on the local capacities, and I think that is an area where the media can play a very, very important role.
You know, when you throw this back at me, like at the media, I would say that, well, anybody would say that we write or we show what people want to see. And I feel that there is an inner sense of drama with the death, disaster, tragedy. You know, why should so many people go to see disaster films, for example? So I think media has been so long playing on this, what they feel is that they know how to sense the market or the readership, etc., that they probably have forgotten, I think, where it all started. And now I think a kind of a saturation point has been reached already. And when you see stories of courage, like you said, the people who, you know, risk everything they have to save their neighbors, their the friends, or people who they don't even know. I mean, for example, in the Yamuna Pushta tragedy, you had a completely unknown stranger jumping into the river to save children. So I think there comes a point, and I think that point has now come, where media is now, and where people in general, not just media, I think society is in search of stories of hope and courage. And I think your organization must be coming across with jaded media people and who know it all, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, in fact, but then to a certain extent I would agree with the media in sensationalizing such issues, because that helps in getting, it helps in getting moving people to do something about it. But of course, it need not be very passive or very, highlighting the helplessness of the people. It has to really show how people are surviving and how people are really coping up with the tragedy. And that is where these stories of courage need to play a very important role, and they are doing that. But apparently, as we see today, these stories are quite few and very dispersed.
Maybe we're not looking, you know, as you said, it's not just the person who risked who tried to save, it's the person who's suffering. The victim also need not be just a victim, but that victim is also a person who must have tried very hard to do something, or a mother who must have tried very hard to save her children or something. I think it's the mindset. And how do you go about, for example, I think now you must be paying a lot of attention on how to give, you know, what they say, feed the media, spoon feeding or whatever. But it's how we perceive ourselves that the media will start perceiving us too. It will take time. But how have you come about changing your own perception and thereby the perception of the victims and the media towards the disaster victims?
Well, I think we can look at two tracks there. On one side, we in the NGO community, I think generally worldwide, we have to realize that nobody can be and exist without the media. So I think it is much wiser, rather than complaining about insufficient coverage, to actually start getting together with the media and very much determine the areas of interest. Like we in the international or national NGO scene, we have certain interest at heart, depending on our organization. At the same time, we have to come to terms with the fact that a media person has also certain needs. It depends if it's daily media, if it's weekly media. On one side, we can have the scoop, we have the news. On the other side, we have the possibility of a more analytical and more in-depth reporting. That's one side. The other track, I think, is a road which the International Red Cross has taken globally a few years ago, when we established what we call the Code of Conduct. The Code of Conduct for any organization in the world who wants to assist in relief work, relief and reconstruction. Now, 10 points of this code make up kind of self-policing document. It's not an executive, it's not no executive power, but 9 of these code points are focusing on the actual application of relief aid. For instance, that we shall give relief assistance without trying to convert people to other religions or whatever. One point is specifically highlighting the role of the media, saying that in our external media, in our public relations strategy, we shall depict people who have been affected by disasters as people who have capacities and as people who have dignity. You were asking earlier on, yes, we do have mixed relationships, we do have mixed experiences, and from my own experience I have seen journalists barging into somebody's house who has just basically lost his entire family with a video camera zooming away and trying with a microphone to get some statement out of this person. These kind of undignified reporting, I think we can do away with. And we should join hands with the media in bringing about a way to behave properly and to get the plight of the people across in case of an emergency.
You know, one thing I can say is that one has to set the ball rolling, and you will see how quickly, you know, the thing catches on. For example, I think it's also how you prepare your press briefs. I was looking at a paper yesterday. This was a press brief from the government of Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka. Basically, what it was saying that winds up to the speed of 150 kilometers per hour had hit the coast, and all the fishermen and women and their families had been taken away, and so many trees had been uprooted, and then one small line down there that not a single life was lost. If I was the press officer or if I was the government, I would start my report by saying that not a single life was lost because so many measures were taken. So I think it's not just, it's the entire mindset, and I'm happy that somebody is out there beginning to change, because it does make a difference very soon. Have you started interacting with
not in the formal sense, but yes, we do realize the sensitivity you pointed out, is that when we are preparing the communities to face disasters, then how do we also incorporate what the media should look at it and how it should look at it. And that is one area where most of the NGOs which we know and who are working with the communities now do not seem to be working towards, and therefore they need to really get into doing this act of preparing briefs which really highlight how communities have coped up with the situation, how they have prepared, and in case of a disaster they will be able to face the situation to their best capacity. And in fact that would really help in other communities trying to replicate the same fact. But yes, you are right, we need to develop on that media and NGO interaction sort of agenda.
You see, as I see it, I think media is not a monolith. You know, when you're talking about media, it's not one monster out there. There are several, although they're getting bigger and bigger. But I'm not talking about censorship, but I think there is a kind of, if we develop, like you have a code of conduct or a feeling where we're sure what is right and what is wrong, then we should have the confidence to snub an over inquisitive reporter who thrusts the microphone in your face and how do you feel about your child dying or things like that. And once we have this confidence, because at this time we are hungry for media, you see, because there's so many competing stories that whoever comes our way, even if they are trampling on our dignity, we let them get away with it because at least they've taken the care to come. But I'm sure as soon as they rush, because media is going to hunger for stories. And so I think one could have this kind of sense developing in oneself, in the NGOs, and probably in some time in ordinary people, that they should know where to stop the media or give a sense of direction. So it's a kind of a larger role that we're talking of.
Yeah, but and that is rather too long term.
That's true.
Because things like that, making ordinary people understand how to react to the media is something which they will not be able to put across, even if they are prepared to do that. Usually they are in such a sad state of affairs that they are not in a position to react. But yes, I think it will be an easier task to train the media instead on not going in for such kind of barging in situations and keep at bay.
That would suggest a closer interactions, for example, workshops or something. Have you tried your...
Yes, we are actually planning for 1999 onwards in collaboration with the National Institute for Disaster Management in Delhi and with our colleagues from the International Committee of the Red Cross to set up a series of seminars, workshops, training events, whatever we want to call that, to invite journalists and bring them together and actually focus on exactly what we discuss now, different ways of reporting. You were saying earlier on different media. Yes, okay, we have the print media, we have the visual media. In many countries, developing countries, although I don't particularly like this term, we have to face the reality that the illiteracy rates are very high. So that immediately cuts out a large portion of the printed media. Then we are left with the visual media. There we have to be very careful, because on one side we have media coverage that is definitely focusing on emergencies, as you said earlier on. Secondly, we have also media coverage that can provide for a longer term, medium term, more analytical, in-depth study. It depends on the kind of report we are wanting to produce. Having said that, we of course can utilize this kind of media also for awareness creation. And for awareness creation by visual media much better than by exclusively printed media in surroundings where the literacy rate is not very high.
You know, this is immediately reminding me of what you were saying earlier, is radio. You know, how you were saying that the disaster in this cyclone which hit the Caribbean has been enormous, and compared to North America, where I think every car is tuned into the radio, and the forewarning
is an excellent example you just gave, and I mean the people of the Caribbean countries, they have unleashed basically an enormous political power now, because they've realized how relatively little their government cared for them in order not to set in place a proper early warning system. Whereas you rightly mentioned that in neighboring North America, hours before the hurricane hit the coast, hundreds of thousands of people were evacuated, entire towns were evacuated, very far inland, with the resulting fact that hardly any life was lost, and people were able to return to whatever was left after the hurricane. Very important part of the media there, and the part which we very often forget, the early warning. But to have this, there has to be a proper structure set up. We cannot just leave it to the media to do, quote, early warning at their best capacity.
In fact, I have an interesting story about the Caribbean also. Recently I met up with a gentleman of the National Meteorological Office in the Caribbean, and he said that the problem about warnings is that people come to know about people in the Caribbean come to know about warnings from the CNN and the American channels, and sometimes when they do not occur, then the national departments are held responsible for that, and that's the other side of the story. So as you rightly said, that we need to incorporate these media workshops where they can be trained on how to inform the people, because the capacity of, while the media is going all around the Caribbean as well as the US, the capacity of the Caribbean people is not as much as the Americans. So obviously there's a big mismatch.
No, but we can give the example of the Kandla port, for example. You know, because that is something where the meteorological department had known for, I think, at least 2 days before the tragedy was to happen, and they said that all the warnings had gone down the line, and why it did not reach the people, because as lots of people said, they were not even aware
of the tragedy.
That something like this was to happen.
I think you were pointing out the same question of the capacity of the people and how we can enhance the capacity of the people. Obviously the printed media is out for most of the lower income communities, the villages especially, and therefore we are left with only the audio visual means.
No, radio is, I mean, you go to the transistor on the cycle, you hear a lot of people with transistor on the bullock carts. Radio is still a very important and credible means.
Unfortunately, in the Kandla tragedy, the worst hit were the salt pan workers, and the reason why they lost their lives, most of them, was because they never knew about it. And so we have a case where maybe the radios even did not inform them, or maybe they were not listening to the radios at that time. So how do we make sure that they reach across? So what I am trying to say is that we are not just looking at media, but we are also looking at other information channels.
Or our perception of the media, like you said, like crying wolf.
Yeah.
And they feel that the media is crying wolf too often.
I think it's very interesting because now you're bringing the discussion into much more what we talk today, where we almost go away from the term media and we talk more about information, education, communication.
Yeah.
And there we certainly have much more potential. If we look, for instance, you were mentioning earlier on, say, Joe, the radio channels. Another form of communication is a very indigenous form in this part of the world, and it's, for instance, drama, street play. And things concerning disaster preparedness, concerning disaster management, can be very easily done in some kind of street drama or street play. There again, people with, for instance, your experience in filmmaking, people with experience in journalism could assist actually NGOs, national, international, for instance, in designing these kind of programs.
Exactly.
You know, that would be a very good complementary way of doing that.
You know, instead of just waiting for something to happen and then to feed the media with our responses, we could create our own media products. Like
exactly. And they could be used by the community themselves in preparing for the disasters, and that's how the entire cycle is completed.
Yeah, because one thing I'm sure is that if something's already done and it's made and handed out, it's the easiest to present it. If there's a press brief or there is a drama or there's a film which is easy to present it.
And in most of the cases, if you look, for instance, both your organization, our organization, we are both focusing on disaster preparedness. As the old saying goes, preparation is better than cure.
Sure.
So prevention is better than cure. So basically, we are trying to focus, like you do, also on the capacity of the local villages. And in that respect, you know, any kind of communication that gets the message across will be beneficial in terms of disaster management. Disaster management itself, when we look, for instance, at government level, you will find that in many developing countries across the globe, the declaration of an emergency can be a rather political problem, can be a rather sensitive problem. So we have to enable the communities, the people who live at the lowest level, at the village level. We have to enable these people to act long before some kind of an official declaration of an emergency is made, because in many cases it is too late.
Yes. I think that's an excellent note of self-help and the dignity of the victims and this confidence that we have in people. We would now like to end our discussion on the positive notes of self-help, of development of confidence and capacities at the local level wherever the disasters strike. And this would directly nurture the local media, which would in turn set a direction for the international and the national media, because we certainly need a sense of direction to counter the commercial pressures which the media have to face increasingly today. Thank you very much.